We want to really get to perhaps the core ideas in the Hagada. And we started going through things a little bit, but our main goal is really just to tell over the miracles of what happened and certain key messages, but we don't want to get too fancy. We don't want to, go beyond the meat and potatoes. We don't want to do the gravy. We don't want to. It's not really the time to spend on gematrios, on fancy lumdas, and the like. It's a time of just getting certain basic messages across. And with that in mind, so I think we can continue. We didn't even finish through the preliminary parts, but the preliminary parts, although I don't really imagine people spending too much time on them in the Seder itself per se, but there's certain ideas to keep in mind as you're reading through them, especially if you're running the Seder. So I think we're up to a massive Rabbi Eliezer. If you look in our source sheets, which are, by the way, not just source sheets, but also meaning to prove a point. The Maggid is actually inherently short. You can fit it on two sides of a page. Standard font. No ridiculously small margins. You can really get it over with rather quickly. I shouldn't say get it over with. It's meant to be expanded. But Chazal made it short for a reason. We mentioned this last week. We made it short so that first of all it's not too overbearing, that we can actually handle it, and also that to whatever extent we want to and have the ability and time to do so, we can expand it on our own. But not something we're being forced to drag out per se. So I wanted to continue with the Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer. That's what we're up to in the Haggadah. I don't know what line it is. I'm using my own personal one, not the source sheet. We're on line 8. Okay. So Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon. Right, you had a number of rabbis. Shahayu Mesubin b'Bnei Brak. They were having their seder. They were reclining in Bnei Brak. They were talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim all night. Until their students came and said to them, Rabboseinu, our rabbis, the time has come for saying Shema. It's already the morning. That they were going through. They were talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim all night, to the extent that they lost track of time, and that they came into the morning without even realizing it. The word Maaseh is very irrelevant when you're looking at Shas. Anytime the word Maaseh comes up, very often it's to introduce a story that's being used as a proof text. Right? This is a Maisa Shahai, a Maisa Rav, whatever you want to say. That if you look at the previous paragraph, what were we saying? We said Avadim Hayinu, and then we said everybody is required in Tzipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, not just the children, despite the fact that we might think it's just for the children because of Hagada to Levincha, the source of the ruling that we're supposed to have this mitzvah tonight. Nevertheless, it's for everyone, no matter how old you are, no matter how much you know about Yetzias Mitzrayim. We're supposed to talk about it more and more. And then, so the very next paragraph naturally should be a Maaseh. Here's a story that proves that point. You have the greatest minds of the time. You have the Tanoim, Rabbi Akiva, perhaps the greatest among of all of them among them, right? And what were they doing? Obviously, we have to keep in mind they were fulfilling the mitzvahs of the night. It's not that they lost track of time and they didn't get halal and they didn't get fikomen or achilas matzah. That would have been a disaster. That's probably not something we would quote. But rather what happened was, and I think this is a key point to emphasize again and again, they did the mitzvahs. They got everything done with. And then Tzipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, that mitzvah doesn't end after the Seder is officially over. There's a continued mitzvah of talking about the story and what we can learn from it to the remainder of the night until you drop, really. If you have energy, and hopefully you do, then a person should continue talking about these things, not just in the meal, not just in Maggid for sure, but even afterwards, before you go to sleep. Maybe, I don't know, you're in your bedroom, you're with your wife, talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim until you both fall asleep, until you both pass out, There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, until you pass out. But anyways, that's a main point that we're trying to bring in this paragraph. That it's look, not only are children involved in this, but even the greatest chachamim, and they did it to such an extent that they lost track of time, and they kept doing it. They kept talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim until the morning, until Kriyas Shema came. Okay, so that's just what I wanted to say about that paragraph. I'm Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, the next one. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says, Harayani kaven shivim shana. I was like a man of 70, and of course all the kids like to say, which is a gravy story to be sure. What does it mean that he was Kiven Shivim Shana? They tell the story of Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. He was appointed to be Nasi in place of Raman Gamliel, and overnight he grew a beard so that people would respect him, that he would be able to be fitting for that position, I guess, in the eyes of everyone else. And then he says, Velosa achisi shetayamar Yetzias Mitzrayim balelos. I wasn't zoch, I didn't merit to be able to say definitively, or to have a proof text to what I'm saying, that a person has to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim every night of the year. Ad shedarsha ben Zoma, until Ben Zoma came along. Shenemar laman tizkras yom teischa me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. Ben Zoma came along, he quoted this pasuk in Devarim that says, in order that you should remember the leaving of Egypt all the days of your life. Yemei chayecha, the days of your life, hayomim, that's referring to the mornings. Kol yemei chayecha, all the days of your life. That extra word kol, that's referring to the evenings as well. The Chachamim say, Yemei chayecha ha'olam hazeh, the days of your life, that's referring to this world. Kol yemei chayecha, the extra word kol, l'havi limos Mashiach, to include, even during the days of the Mashiach, you're still going to be doing whatever mitzvah we're talking about. But of course, you always have to look at this in context, and all of the things that we're going to be talking about in the Seder, you have to know what's being discussed in the greater picture. Because if you just come into the Seder and just coming into the Hagada for the first time on Seder night, it's going to be very unclear what they're talking about. Anybody have any idea what they're talking about?
Which about what are they talking about?
Right.
The kol part?
They're darshaning, they're expounding on certain words in a pasuk, but what halacha are they expounding about? What are they developing?
Kriya Shema.
Right. They're talking about Kriya Shema. They're not talking about Tzipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Right. Even though there's a pasuk that has the word Mitzrayim in it, that's not quite enough. The pasuk that they're using, and even that pasuk, if you look at it in context, it's always important to take a look at the Chumash. Take a look at where this pasuk is being quoted. This is being quoted in the context of Korban Pesach. So then we have a double question: how did they learn the laws of Kriya Shema from a pasuk about Korban Pesach? And moreover, how did they learn what's it doing in our Hagada if it's about Kriya Shema? So how do we make sense of these two ideas? You have to say something along the lines of as follows, which I think is really the main goal of this paragraph itself. The Korban Pesach is explained in the Torah itself with this pasuk that they're elaborating on. So the goal of the Korban Pesach is that you should remember Yetzias Mitzrayim every single day of your life, right? Now, as meaningful as a Korban Pesach or even in our day a Seder experience as you might have, are you thinking about your Seder every year, every day of every year? Probably not. The Chachamim saw that, they acknowledged that, and they said, well, Kol Yemei Chayecha, how do I accomplish that goal of the pasuk? It must be that we have to do something more than that. And obviously they realize we're not going to be having a Seder, Korban Pesach, every night of the year. Right? That's certainly not the goal of what we're supposed to be accomplishing. So they realize, you know what it's talking about? It's talking about not Kriya Shema per se, but specifically one paragraph in Kriya Shema. The third paragraph, where we mentioned that last pasuk of Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher hotzeisi eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim liyos lachem le'elokim. I am the God that took you out of Egypt to be a God unto you. Right? So they understood that there was a need to make mention of Yetzias Mitzrayim through that pasuk, through the third paragraph of Kriya Shema, and they got it from this parsha. And with that entire idea in mind, then you could understand how they're arguing about whether there's also an obligation to say it at night or perhaps past Yemos HaMashiach. By the way, how do we paskin? Who do we hold like? How do we paskin? Who do we conclude like? Do we conclude like Rabbi Eliezer, who says you're supposed to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim every night as well as the morning, or do we hold like the Chachamim that say that you're supposed to talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim even after Yemos HaMashiach during the day?
No, we hold the first one.
The first one, right? Which actually gives us a very interesting conclusion that apparently we're not going to be mentioning. We're not going to have a mitzvah, at least to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim every day of the year after Yemos HaMashiach. Why would that be? Any ideas?
Have to be reminded of it.
What?
We'll talk about the Mashiach.
Talk about the Mashiach, right? Muslim Mashiach is going to blow it away. Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's how amazing it's going to be.
There's only one left, right? So I have to consider that as well.
Whatever that means.
You say that's the only holiday.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm just coming off of that. So.
Right. But the important idea here is what we're doing is we're taking psukim about Korban Pesach, about the Pesach holiday itself, and we're using it and we're developing it to give us dinim, laws to follow each and every day of the year. Essentially, what we're supposed to be doing, if you look at the role that this pasuk and this idea plays in that general context of the parsha that it's in, the Chazal saw the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, of what we're doing on the night of the Seder, as being a kind of a Yom Iyun. It's supposed to be the night in which you really get in depth to the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and to remember it constantly, as deep as an experience you're going to have that night, it's not going to be enough. You have to remember it verbally each and every night. However, it is rooted in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim that we're doing tonight. You're kind of creating a point of reference by which every time you mention Yetzias Mitzrayim in the morning, at night, when you say Kriya Shema, you're supposed to remember what exactly Yetzias Mitzrayim was, based on the way you've developed it on this evening.
So it's a foundation for the year almost.
Right. That's an important idea that I think is that's crucial. That's probably the reason why we have this paragraph here.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an opinion in the Koran in the West, in Israel, they didn't say the third paragraph at night?
You see that there was in Rabbi Eliezer in Rabbi Eliezer's time, it wasn't a simple matter. The Chachamim argued on it, and eventually managed to win them over through Ben Zoma finding a pasuk that can be a source to his idea.
You would say with the Hagada, like in theory, would you have to say the third paragraph?
In theory, you probably would not have to, right? Because you're certainly mentioning the exes from Egypt, right? And even I think the Gemara itself takes it from a technical perspective. You don't need to say the third parsha of Kriyat Shema. The brachos of Kriyat Shema itself, which mention Yetzias Mitzrayim in Mariv, that itself fulfills this requirement. So it's not that that pasuk in Kriyat Shema is a fixed text that you have to say. You have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim in whatever way you can. But anyways, it's just something that's very important to point out, that why do we have this paragraph here if at first glance it has nothing to do with Yetzias Mitzrayim? The reason why is because it's meant to contextualize everything that we're going to do later. Right? That's a key point to understand. Okay.
Where is the reference to the korban?
Right. So in the actual, if you look in the words that they're using in this paragraph alone, you won't see that.
Then right. Why you say that?
Because there is a pasuk that they're quoting. Right?
Which one is it?
There is Laman Tizkar Yom Teischa Me'eretz Mitzrayim Kol Yemei Chayecha. That's a pasuk that if you look in context, what are the other pasukim surrounding it in the Torah? In that parsha, you realize the entire context of the whole is talking about Karban Pesach.
Oh, is that right?
And that's a key to understanding almost everything in the Haggadah here. If you just come to the Haggadah, the first night, and not having seen anything before, not looking into anything, in many ways you're going to be lost. What's crucial is looking at the pasukim that are quoted, how they're being used, and then going back to the Torah, going back to the pasukim, and seeing the larger context of which it's a part of. That's crucial. Okay. There's a lot of beautiful ideas that people say with regards to Rabbi Eliezer becoming a 70-year-old man, etc. It's not the core. It's not what we're really after in elaborating with the Haggadah itself. Okay, so next we have Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu Baruch Shanasan Torah La'amo Yisrael Baruch Hu. Right? Blessed is the place. That's reference to God. God is the place in which we all exist in. We exist as a part of God. Baruch Hu, blessed is He. Baruch Shanasan Torah La'amo Yisrael. Blessed is the one who has given the Torah to the Jewish people. Baruch Hu, again, blessed is He. So this is viewed as most to be an intro to the Arba Banim, to the four sons. According to the Ritva, I think this is really hitting it on the head as to what this is all about. That this is in some way it's a blessing on the Torah, and this unique piece of Torah that we're going to be discussing when we talk about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, when we come into the official formal Haggadah. We're not there yet, but anyways, what the Ritva is saying is, why do we have these four languages? We're meant to address the fact that the Torah is very wide in scope. It addresses every kind of person, every audience, everybody that's looking for a certain kind of message. The Torah has it for them. And the Torah is for everyone. You have to simply know where to look. And why is this here in particular? Why is it? First of all, it's an introduction to the Arba Banim. But why do we have the Arba Banim? What's the purpose of them before we get into the formal Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim?
You seem to be kind of Jew.
Okay.
Represented by the four sons.
Very good. Right. That if we're blessing HaKadosh Baruch Hu about how expansive and addressing everything, the ability that the Torah has to do that. So we're now going to talk. There's four different. There's probably more than four different types of people in the world, but we break it down to different types of children, and we say that the Torah can address each and every one of their questions. Now, if you're a teacher, and Seder night, if you're running a Seder, everybody's a teacher, so you have to know there's a crucial message here that V'higada Televincha, you're supposed to tell your children about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. But nevertheless, that's a message that's going to be variable. That's going to be adjusted based on your child's ability, the way his personality works, the way he's thinking. I just looking around, always important to try to find the earliest sources for a certain idea. There's a Midrash Lekach Tov that basically says this idea of the Ritva. So the Tanaim themselves, they viewed it in this way. They say, Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah. They quote this part of the Haggadah. The Torah speaks to four different children. Echad Chacham, Echad Rasha, Echad Tam, Echad Shenu Yadei Alishol. And now this is where they elaborate. L'chol Echad ve'Echad Nitna Torah Derech Lahashiv Kafi Inyano. For each and every one of those kids, the Torah has given a way by which you can respond to the way he looks at things. The world is created with four different, personality types. Rasha, Chacham, Tam, each and every one is looking at things with his own scope. That's essentially the message of the Arba Banim. And that's why we're getting into that again, preliminary, not quite into the Haggadah formally yet, but we're giving whoever is telling over, whoever's in charge of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim that night, we're giving him crucial information has to that he has to know. Each and every child is different. The way he's going to tell over this message is going to work differently. I'm going to skip the actual Arba Banim themselves. If you're looking for, I think, probably the best kind of questions, the best kind of issues to raise, when you look at the Arba Banim, again, it goes back to the idea of look at the psukim that are quoted, look at them in the greater context in which they're quoted in the Chumash, and see first of all what's the topic, at which point the child asks this question. And also, see, very often you'll find that the answer given to the question in the Torah is not the answer used by the author of the Haggadah. He changes things up significantly. In certain situations, he uses the same answer for two children. The Rasha and the Sheni Yadei Alishal have the same answer, and even though they're asking different questions. So there's a lot to bring out there. So the Baal Haggadah, whoever authored the Haggadah, who was that? I think, did we talk about this last week at all? Who was the author of the Haggadah? No?
The Gaonim?
I don't know if I had mentioned this, in the Malbim Haggadah, which is not actually written by the Malbim actually, but by somebody named Rav Naftali Maskil Le'esan. He wrote the Haggadah in Malbim style, so to speak. Somehow it became known as the Malbim Haggadah. But anyways, he in his overview, he discusses who actually wrote it. And using the people that the author of the Haggadah is quoting, seeing, well, he came certainly after this person, because he's quoting him. He certainly came before these people for other reasons. He develops a theory that it was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the author of the Mishnah, that actually put together the Haggadah. He seems to put together a solid approach as to why that might be the case. But anyways, if you also look, this is something else where you might get a little bit fancier. If you look in other sources, the Talmud Yerushalmi has their own version of the four sons. Notably, the Tam actually is called the Tipesh, the stupid one. It's a little bit more critical of him, and there's a lot of differences as well in other versions that you might have within the works of Chazal than what we have in the Haggadah. But anyways, however it is in the Haggadah is what we're working with.
Which
the
one?
Talmud Yerushalmi.
But we don't use that one, right?
We use it if there's the only rule is that anytime you have a conflict between the Talmud Bavli and the Talmud Yerushalmi with regards to how to rule in Jewish law, so usually the Talmud Bavli wins. But both are considered, important storehouses of information.
Why in the Talmud Bavli, the four sons? Why only?
It didn't really work that way. They were both two separate works that were composed. It wasn't really somebody was putting it together everything and could have drawn from those sources also. Anyway, so the next paragraph, we're skipping the Arba Banim. I think there's certainly what to talk about there, but nothing that I think is really crucial besides that idea of each child having a certain different kind of voice and a different kind of outlook that we all have to address.
Part of that child and all of us sometimes as well.
Right, that's certainly true. And then everybody likes to say also there's the fifth child, right? The one that's not at the Seder, right? So there's probably we could be broken down into a lot more than even 5 personality types. But that's, I guess, a basic sketch. Okay, so the next paragraph says Yachol Me Rosh Chodesh, right? You would have thought that the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim would be on Rosh Chodesh. That's also important. You have to go back to the source for this. It's in the Gemara somewhere. I don't remember exactly where. But what they're talking about right now is how do I know when to do the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? I would have thought on Rosh Chodesh, Tamilomar Bayomahu. Therefore, the pasuk says on that day. Again, so the pasuk they're quoting, you have to look. Where is it? What are the details it's discussing? It's the paragraph that's dealing with Karban Pesach. It's one of the parshas that's in our Tefillin. As a whole, if you look at that, if you look at those psukim, that's set, and you read them critically, you'll notice it's actually very unclear from looking at the words plainly when exactly I'm supposed to do this Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. We've grown up knowing that we do it on Seder night, but it's not a given if you look at the Torah's text itself. So that's what this paragraph is all about. How do I know when exactly I'm supposed to do this? So they expound on it by I guess delving into the text a little bit more deeply, by which they figure it out.
Could you translate it?
Sure.
How it says? It says that day.
Right. So let's read through
it. It just says because it says Babur there because of this.
So Bayomahu is 2 words that are in one of the psukim, that are in one of that's in that entire parsha. It says on that day, Bayomahu. I'm drawing a blank. What's the pasuk as a whole? Bayomahu.
There's a Chumash.
Trying to remember. We have a Chumash. Anybody want to pass me a Chumash? Shemos Yud Gimel Ches. I don't remember the exact language. Oh, V'yigalat Levincha Bayomahu. Yeah, you come to your child on that day, you tell him on that day, Bav Zeh, because of this, God did for me that I came out of Egypt. An interesting pasuk.
This is in Shemot?
This is in Shemos. This is Perek Yud Gimel, pasuk Ches.
In Parshas, which Parsha?
This is the end of Parshas Bo.
Oh.
If you look, yeah. So, Ibayomahu, they say on that day, right? So apparently on that day is referring to the day of Pesach. But now they say Ibayomahu, if on that day, Yachol Ba'od Yom, maybe it's not just in general the day that a person brings Karban Pesach, but maybe it's even during the daytime of that day, and not just the night. Talmud Lomar, therefore, the pasuk goes out of its way to also tell you an additional idea, Ba'avur Zeh, because of this, right? Then we're referring to what's the Karban Pesach that they're eating at that time. Although now I think it might actually, in thinking back, I think that part is actually referring to matzah, not Karban Pesach. It's referring to matzah. The matzah is the Zeh. So on the night that you eat matzah, on the night you eat matzah, that's the Zeh. And you're saying because of this, God took me out of Egypt. So specifically at the time in which you're eating matzah. Therefore, we learn from this that at the time that you can say Zeh and point to something that's right on your table, that's when Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is as well.
Why
Right?
is there a question? If this is said in the context of when they were leaving Egypt, we know the date. Why are we going to think it's Rosh Chodesh?
No, so this is not describing what they did in Egypt that year. This is describing, this is Moshe
When they
telling the
left
Jewish
Egypt.
people, right now that we're leaving Egypt, let me tell you something that we're going to do for generations and generations.
Yeah, but we know that date, so like it makes sense we'll do it.
Right, but I don't think it can necessarily be assumed that we would do it on the same on the same anniversary day as the nation did back then. They have to see that more outright in the Psukim themselves, and they developed the idea to get to that same conclusion that you're mentioning, that it's going to be on the night that we're commemorating leaving Egypt. But anyways, why are we talking about this again? With all these paragraphs that don't directly deal with Yetzias Mitzrayim, we have to ask this question constantly. Basically, I think this paragraph is meant to tell you, Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's the night. This is the night. One time a year. For us, maybe two. But this is when you're supposed to do it. So really appreciate the fact that this is a once-a-year endeavor. This is something we're going to get to do now and not later. And then, after that, we're actually going to start coming into the Hagada formal. So congratulations, you made it. Hopefully, it's very important when you're running your Seder.
That night too.
These are ideas that we should be aware of as we're going through these previous paragraphs. They're important. I don't necessarily think you have to elaborate on them at the Seder itself. You have to know, if you're the one running the Seder, you have to know these ideas that the paragraphs are trying to communicate to you. And very often we have an issue that these are the paragraphs that perhaps get most developed by the children, that they have all the stuff that they come back from school with, and it eats up a lot of time. It really does. So you have to be aware of that. You want to probably get through these as quickly as possible, knowing what they're meant to accomplish, right, as you're reading them. But we don't need to go crazy about them, because again, they're not going to be the ikar point of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. They're kind of a preamble. They're kind of getting you primed to do this mitzvah. But just to recap, what are we doing with these previous paragraphs? What we're essentially doing is giving a pregame analysis. We're answering a lot of questions about this mitzvah that we're about to embark on. From Manish Tana until Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer, we discussed who is obligated to be involved in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Not just kids, but everyone. Right? With Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, we described what we're doing. Right? We're developing a framework by which we can reflect on Yetzias Mitzrayim each and every day of the following year. With regards to the Arba Banim, we discussed how to do the mitzvah with a unique voice that speaks to each kid based on his abilities. And then from Yachol Rosh Chodesh, we described when is the mitzvah supposed to be done, right now. Then with that, we come into the formal Haggadah. Okay. So mitchila of the avodah zarah hayu avoseinu. At first, our forefathers were idol worshippers. And now God has brought us close to His service. Shene'emar, for the pasuk says, this is the pasuk in Yehoshua. Again, what's the context of this pasuk in Yehoshua? If you look, this is the last parak of the Sefer. This is as Yehoshua is giving his farewell address before he's passing on and not going to be the leader of the Jewish people anymore. He's giving them, in many ways, an ultimatum. He says, choose a side. Choose that you're going to be with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that you're not going to be with people that worship Avodah Zarah, as your forefathers were. Right, so that's the context in which this is coming up. But let's just read the pasuk. Vayomer Yehoshua el kol ha'am. Yehoshua says to the entire people, Ko amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael. This is what God, the God of the Jews, says, Be'ivra hanar yashva v'seichem me'olam. On the other side of this river, they're already in Israel, by the way, they're in Shechem at this point. On the other side of the river, that's where your forefathers were originally from. Terach avi Avraham v'avi Nachor. There's Terach, the father of Abraham, his father Nachor. V'yavdu Elohim achirim. There they worshipped other gods. Ve'ekakas abichem es Avraham me'ivra hanar. I took your forefather Abraham from there, brought him to this side of the river. V'olechos b'chol eretz Canaan. And I walked him around. I gave him a tour of all of the land of Israel. I increased his progeny. I gave him Yitzchak. Yaakov es Esav. I gave Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Esav. Es Har Seir. So I gave Esav the mountain of Seir to inherit it. Yaakov Avonav Yardu Mitzrayim. Yaakov and his children, they went down to Egypt. And then if you look in the progression of those psukim, he gives a whole account of Yetzias Mitzrayim, how we got there in the first place, and how we came out, eventually came to Eretz Yisrael, and now we have a job to do. We have a mission. In any event, this paragraph as well as the next two. So this is the start of the Hagada, as it would be told by Rav. We have a mandate from the Mishnah in Pesachim. If you look, Maskil B'Ganus U'Mesayim B'Shvach. You're supposed to start with our state of degradation and then move to the Shvach, to our state of glory, right? But there's a machlokas in the Gemara itself as to what aspect are we talking about? From the slavery aspect, physical,
idol worship. Aren't we talking from the idol?
Right, so the second perspective is that of Rav, which is what we're starting with right now. We're talking from a spiritual perspective. We were on a very low level originally as a people, and we came to the one true religion, worshiping the one true God in the right way. So you have Rav being of the opinion that we're supposed to start ganus of being in a downtrodden state with regards to the spiritual. If you look at the actual language of the Gemara, I'll quote it to you. Maskil beganus Messiah b'shvach, my beganus. When we talk about starting with our state of degradation and ending with our state of glory, what exactly is the degradation we're talking about? Rav Amar mitchila ovdei avodas gilulim hayu avosenu. We start from the words mitchila, this paragraph that we're starting right now. Ushmuel Amar avadim hayinu. Shmuel says we were slaves in Egypt. Now, it's noteworthy, first of all, that this discussion of the Amoram, they're referring to the text of the Haggadah, which means already in Rav and Shmuel's time.
That's not officially the Haggadah yet.
In the Gemara, this is the language in the Gemara, but they're referring to specific words that match exactly what we have here. Like Rav says, you start with Metchila of the Avodah Kochavim, right? It sounds like he's referring directly to a certain kind of text. You start from those words. I don't know where else that text is, right? And then you have Shmuel saying, no, Avadim Hayinu, right? So it sounds like, and this is where you might get the idea that whoever compiled the Haggadah was somebody that came before Rav and Shmuel. Might have been a Tana. So because you have the language here where they seem to be referring to something that's right in front of them that fits the language of what we have.
No, but
exactly.
then it would come after them, because otherwise where are they arguing?
No, so what do we do? We do both, right? That's important to read, right? We say Avdim Hayinu, we say Mitchila, we say both ideas, but it sounds like their discussion is not what do you say, right? The question of the Gemara in the exact language is my beganus. What is this downtrodden state that the Mishnah is referring to that we should start with, right? So at what point in the Haggadah are you actually starting to do the mitzvah of Sibur Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? So then there's a machlok. Is it referring to this text or to that text? Everybody's acknowledging that you say everything, right? It's not a machlokas in the sense that I think you should say, this scroll as opposed to that one. They were working off of something. Anyways, so this is our spiritual beginnings, right? When we focus on our low status here, we're referring to the spirituality. The Orchos Chaim, so he's one of the Rishonim. Again, if you in recommended Haggadahs, we didn't do this. We did this in the first year, but I highly recommend the Torah Chaim Haggadah. It has the commentary of all the Rishonim, who, if you want to get to the most, I think, basic core ideas, what's being explained by the Haggadah, they're usually good to go to. When you come to later authorities, they very often develop more elaborate, perhaps overly fancy ideas that aren't really our goal in Sibur Yetzias Mitzrayim.
Isn't there a problem with the spiritual impoverishment? Because it was a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, you're saying we came from idol worshippers, but then we became sort of idol worshippers in Mitzrayim again.
Right.
So we're going way back to before Abraham. We sort of rose and then fell, as opposed to the physical, where we're saying, well, we were slaves in Egypt and we got out.
The tradition is that we were on a very low level in Egypt itself as well. That is right on the Zohar Chadash says we were on the 49th level of Tumah before we got out, right? It's always important to realize what's in the text itself, what's not. There's no mention in the Torah itself that we were on a very low level. Now it's true, that's the language of Chazal, and that's something we should definitely believe in and hold to. But yeah, from that perspective, it's a question, right? Why are we talking about our spiritual beginnings earlier than Abraham, when this low point spiritually can be attributed to a later time? I think because we're talking about basically the start of Jewish history at this point. If you look in the next paragraph we're going to get into the Bris Bein HaBasar, right? That's something involving Avraham. So we're kind of starting with a whole historical sketch. Yeah. We're setting a stage in many ways with from the very, very beginning. So let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, so we're bringing this pasuk from Yoshua, right? That in many ways this is also going to be important. Why are we using this pasuk in Yoshua as opposed to anything else describing the fact that why not quote the words of Chazal that say that we were originally idol worshippers? I think again because it refers to that idea. Our beginnings of being idol worshippers before Abraham is also not in the Torah per se, right? We know that as a medrash, the story about Abraham destroying the idols, but it's not in there specifically. If you want to quote the most authoritative sources from Tanakh, right? So that'll probably have more weight than the words of Chazal. Yet at the same time, if you look in Chumash, we don't have that. Yoshua is the earliest source I think we have that describes this. But anyways, it's a very fitting way to start the formal Hagada, where we're realizing that our history, it gives us a unique mission. That's the context in which Yoshua is speaking, and we need to understand not just what happened with regards to the story of leaving Egypt, but what its implications are. And Yoshua takes it in that direction. If you look at the entire thing that he's saying. Okay, so what we're up to next is there's a lot of questions that people ask that I think is also gravy-ish. Is where's Yishmael in this pasuk? Right, but that's not something we need to get into now. Okay, Baruch Shomer Havtachasa Yisrael. So
where is Yishmael?
Where is Yishmael? We can talk about it after this year. But anyways, we're running short on time already.
And not Yishmael. That's why.
Yeah, good questions. That we'll maybe address at a later time. So Baruch Shomer Havtachasa Yisrael. Blessed is he, God obviously, who kept his promise to the Jewish people. Baruch Hu, blessed is he. Sha'akadosh Baruch Hu hishav es haketz lasos kamash amar la'Avraham Avinu b'Bris Bein HaBasarim. God thought and calculated the end, as it said with regards to the way he told Abraham at the covenant of the parts. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk there. And again, in full context, this is Abraham telling Hashem, I'm worried I don't have any children. He says, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Abraham says, how am I going to know that? Bama Eda. How am I going to know that that's going to happen? God says, okay, let's do a whole process where you take a number of animals, you cut them in half, and then sacrifice them to me. And God gives Abraham a nevuah at that point where he communicates to him the following message. Vayomer la'Avram, he says to Abraham, who's not Abraham yet, to Abraham, Yado ateda kiger hiyeh zaracha be'eretz lo lahem. Know that your children, they're going to live in a land that does not belong to them. There'll be strangers there. Va'avadum v'inu osam. I'm going to cause them to be enslaved. They're going to be afflicted. Arba meo shana, for 400 years. But also the nation which is enslaving them, I'm going to enact judgment on. Afterwards, they're going to leave with tremendous wealth. So the purpose of this paragraph is, again, this is also kind of preliminary. Before we actually talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're talking about how we're getting there. But what we're saying is that this was preordained. It's important to point out. We talked about this as possibly being a topic for deeper conversation at the meal, right? That you might want to have, not in the Hagada itself, but in the meal. When we could ask the question, why exactly are we thanking God for taking us out of Egypt if He's the one that put us there in the first place? Right? We can't say, it was our actions that did it, although it was, because in many ways it was predetermined. You have these psukim here where Hashem tells Abraham before the whole process of Yosef being sold into Egypt, the whole chain of events as they played out, you have God telling Abraham that this is going to happen, right? So it's interesting to note, I think, that the Haggadah calls this a havtacha. But what God is communicating to Abraham right now is not a punishment. This isn't I'm going to get you, and we typically understand it that way. Why? What do we think Abraham's being punished for typically when we say that?
Doubting Hashem and going to be fruitful, am I going to have a child?
Right. He says, Bama Eda. Right, and the Chazal came to that conclusion as it being a consequence.
So it follows directly after.
Right, it follows directly after in the Psukim. Abraham says, how am I going to know? And then immediately after Hashem says, okay, let's do this Bris Bein HaBasarim thing. And then he communicates to him that message. So it's viewed as a reaction to that in many ways. It's important to realize that a consequence is not necessarily a punishment. You typically assume that this is viewed as a punishment for Bama Eda, But in many ways it's not. And, here there's...
The slavery was because he had some doubt, and you're saying that's not a punishment.
That's the way it's typically understood, that it's a punishment.
Well, what else can slavery be?
Right, so it could be a consequence that is not a punishment per se. We'll talk about exactly what that means. So this is an idea I think that's mostly developed by the Maharal, but it's a crucial idea for the Seder. Is that the answer to that question of why are we thanking God for taking us out of Egypt if He put us there in the first place, is because obviously we have to say something along the lines of the fact that taking us out of that putting us in Egypt in the first place was a worthwhile endeavor, that our experience there had some value to it, and we want to leave eventually for sure, and we're thanking God for that. But getting there in the first place was part of the journey, that it was something that we wanted to do. And the Maharal explains that B'ma'edah is not Avraham saying, how am I going to know I don't have Emunah, and therefore God says I'm going to punish you by putting you into Egypt. It's just, listen, Avraham naturally didn't have that Emunah, whether you could fault him for that or not. It's a very fine mistake. However, it certainly doesn't seem to be something which is worthy of punishing future generations for 400 years. First of all, because they're not the ones that said this statement. We don't get punished for the sins of our parents, right? But more, it seems to be, even if you would accept that children could theoretically be punished for the deeds of their parents, it seems very extreme here, right?
It's not exactly measure for measure either.
Right. So the Maharal develops an idea which is extremely important. He says, anything at its roots, if there's a flaw in it, it's going to develop into a much more complicated and damaging flaw in the future. Lamashal, you take an embryo. If an embryo is damaged on its way to becoming a child, which eventually ends up becoming a full-grown person, so there's really no hope at that point. It's very fragile.
Unstable foundation.
Right. It's the foundations are crucial. So to whatever extent you want to attribute blame, you don't have to. If Avraham said B'ma'edah and there was a flaw in his emunah in one way or another, so Maharal says that Hashem's response is not necessarily a punishment as much as, if I'm going to make you into a great nation, and you have this flaw right now, at a very sensitive stage in the development of who your people are going to be, we're going to have to nip this in the bud. And the way that can be done is through the experience in Egypt. We mentioned last week that Moshe Rabbeinu in Sefer Devarim refers to Egypt as a kur habarzel, the iron crucible, that it refines metals in the same way that Egypt refined us in one way or another. It's worthy of discussion. Why exactly? What did we get out of being in Egypt? Right?
And it has to be Emunah.
Right. If the flaw was in Emunah, it has to give us Emunah in one way or another.
No, but then that took away our free choice, because going through the fire can also melt a person. Having that kind of thing, God obviously knew we were going to gain from it. So that took away our free choice, because when you were given a challenge, you can fail also. But if God chose that challenge for us, He knew we were going to pass, that took away our free choice.
But I would say in many ways, I don't think we did pass the test. If you look, what's our experiences after leaving Egypt?
So then what did it do for us?
So that's
20% out of the other 80.
Right. So in some ways that's sifting them out. But even the 20% that were left, they did a virus when they left Egypt. There are certain Midrashim that say they were even carrying idols as they're walking through the Yam Suf. Right? So what are we going to do with that? I don't think we could say, obviously, even within this approach of the Maharal, that the Jewish people were on a madrega of Emunah higher than Avram Avinu as they were leaving. That's certainly not the case. But I think you can say we have is that we now have an experience that you can constantly draw on to be the ultimate source of Emunah. I think that's what we have to say, something along those lines. Right? You take a people that were in the lowest of low states during this episode of being in Egypt, right? And you take them out with tremendous miracles that can't be denied. That's going to be a point in history where even the Jewish people, they might not necessarily use it properly immediately when they leave Egypt, right? They made mistakes still then. But for us, we have a moment now in history, they had it also, that you could use as a frame of reference where you have something to build on, perhaps as a foundation of Emunah.
Couldn't you say that the test that they had based on those generations of slavery, of shefting the idol of the Egyptians, showed Emunah?
Absolutely.
I mean, so.
But perfect Emunah that's greater than Abraham's is difficult to say.
Based on what level of Emunah we need to what Emunah they were able to show given their circumstances.
No, I think you think that we have like proof now. We can no longer be like Abraham and ask B'ma'edah because we have the proof. We have the Exodus as our proof. We're not where he was. So we had to go through that. What is it? Sinai?
Well, that's another
the same thing, isn't it?
We're going to talk about that eventually in the Hagada. At the end of Dayenu, we come to the giving of the Torah. We're going to have another holiday which is almost viewed as part 2 of Pesach and Shavuos. So that's also an important experience for this. the Orchos Chaim, he's one of the Rishonim that comments on the Hagada. He understands Leil Shimurim, right? We usually understand that as a night of being guarded, of being protected, right? Because we weren't killed along with the other firstborns. In Egypt, he understands it as in the sense of like Yaakov Avinu Shamar Asadavar. He was almost with regards to Yosef's dream. He kept the matter in mind. That there's almost that sense of anticipation. That God, far be it from this being a punishment, he couldn't wait to get it over with, because he didn't want this process to be as painful as it was, but apparently it was something necessary for leaving Egypt to serve its purpose. Okay.
What does it have to do with Yosef's dream?
The word shamar can be used in many ways to connote not just guarding, but an anticipation.
How was Yosef's dream in anticipation?
So when Yosef told his dreams over to his brothers, Yaakov Avinu, after he at least in front of everybody else says, Yosef, what are you thinking? These dreams are nonsense. Then the pasuk goes on to say, but Yaakov shamar es hadavar. Yaakov nevertheless kept the matter to heart. He was
he had a hint.
Yeah,
of something.
He thought there was something to it. So in that sense, Leil Shimurim can be the night in which God is excited to take us out.
Baruch Shomer Havdachasod is also connected to that.
I think so, right? That if you view the entire placement into Egypt as a havtacha, not as a punishment, but a promise, right? It kind of gives off that impression that it's meant to have a positive benefit, right? Not just a corrective action per se, but meant to actually be a learning experience. Okay, so then we get to V'hisha Amda. V'hisha Amda lavosenu v'lanu. This is what stood by us for our forefathers and ourselves. Shelo echad b'lvad amad aleinu l'chalasenu. Not just one person came and tried to destroy us. Ela shebechol dor v'dor umdim aleinu l'chalasenu. Each and every generation, people try to destroy us. Hakadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyadim. And nevertheless, God saves us from each and every one of their hands. The biggest question, obviously, is what's the V'hi? What's and this in V'hisha Amda?
It's a feminine. It's she, isn't it? And she isn't it feminine?
Well, in the Hebrew language, we don't have a word for it. There's either male or feminine nouns.
Sometimes it's who. It's not always he.
Right. So sometimes it's who, if you're referring to a male noun.
Right.
So he is referring to a feminine noun. But in any event, what is it referring to? You have an ambiguous pronoun here. Any ideas?
Could be Hashem.
Could be Hashem. Right, in many ways it is.
He's sustaining us, like our fathers and us.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of, I think, gravy answers that people give. I think the Netziv says you lift your cup. At this point, we say Hisham. He says this cup are rules for Yayin Nesach and Stam Yayin that kept us separate from the Goyim. That's what stood for us. It's interesting.
The wine, you mean?
Yeah. So how exactly it communicates that? No, what he meant by that was that there's halachos of wine that we have to be very careful about. A non-Jew touching our wine can very often ruin it, and the rabbis made those rules perhaps to prevent assimilation. So the Netziv says when you lift up your cup of wine, you're saying this attitude of knowing that we're separate, etc. That's what stood by us. It's an interesting idea. It's not a meat and potatoes answer. I think the primary answer you're going to have to give is, what's the previous paragraph referring to? Blessed is God who kept his promise to the Jewish people. The promise. That's what we're talking about. This promise is what stood by us. That God says he's going to take the nation out of Egypt and judge the Egyptians. We're elaborating on that. We're saying, and this is what the Orchos Chaim says is the key message of why we're bringing up all this other stuff beforehand, is Emunas Kabbaleilos, to believe in God even in the darkest of nights, to remember that the promise to Abraham wasn't just that the Jewish people are going to be taken out from Egypt in that particular point in time, but any time the Jewish people are ever going to be in a time of trouble, we're going to be able to rely on God. God promises us that we're going to be a great nation, not just after leaving Egypt, but throughout history we're going to have a presence, that we're going to eventually have the Geula.
Eternal nation as well.
Right. And if you look at the actual context of the pasuk we quoted by Abraham in the Beit Midrash, many of the commentaries take the animals that Abraham sacrifices, they use them to represent the different golios, the different exiles that we have, and that certainly supports this idea very strongly.
But isn't it that the Brit and Hafsam only talking about 400 years? God says they're going to be there for all those years, and then I'll take them out.
Right. That's
End of story. It doesn't say he's going to save us all the time.
Right, so if you look in the Psukim itself, it sounds like he's only talking about leaving Egypt.
One time.
This, I think, is an expansion by Chazal. And they have ample hints to that, like we mentioned, the carbon itself that Abraham brings with many animals might be representing the fact that there's a lot of other there's going to be a lot of other situations where we're also going to experience hardship, and God's going to take us out there as well. But yes, if you look at the Pesukim themselves, what is God telling Avram? Only with regards to leaving Egypt. That's true. But what we're saying in Vihisha Amda is Chazal taking a message from that and saying that this is everlasting.
We get other hints like Joseph's dream and the number of steps up and down and the years of exiles as well. So
right, there's a lot of hints there. Is there anything explicit? She's pointing out that there isn't anything explicit. But that's Chazal's expansion.
That this was put over here where it's referring to the future and we hardly started. It's kind of like an interruption. It's like just and then we're going back to the story and this little thing comes out. It doesn't really belong. It would belong better at the end.
Right, but if you view this paragraph as being referring to the Havtacha of the promise that God gave to Avraham, Empress Beit Mitzrayim, then it's perfect. It makes perfect sense to put it right here. Right? That if you're viewing God's promises not just referring to the nation leaving Egypt, but more, then this would be the place to put it. Okay, so the next part of the Haggadah, Seyu Lamad, we're probably not going to get very far in it. I think we'll go till 9. But here we begin the next requirement of Sibri Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Mishnah and the Rambam that we learned last class, they mentioned that one of the key points of the Haggadah is that you're going to expand on the verses of Arami Oved Avi, right? So that's a set of psukim. Again, you have to look back in the Chumash. What are we referring to that we're going to read? It's the set of psukim that a farmer reads when he brings his first fruits, the bikurim, to the Beis HaMikdash. We might not expect, that this is the situation where a person is going to then go on a whole discourse about Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is what these psukim are about. But nevertheless, a farmer does. We have to figure out why that is. And also we have to understand why we chose this narrative to be the one that we're going to expand Sibri Yetzias Mitzrayim from. In total, it's only 6 psukim, right? And we're actually not even going to read all of it. We're only going to read the first 4 psukim. That's what we're going to expand on the Haggadah itself. So like we mentioned last week, we're not taking from the entire book of Shemos, or the first, 16 chapters until you get to Az Yashir. Right? Why aren't we doing that for the Haggadah? Too long, right? That would be crazy. But nevertheless, there are other psukim that give a synopsis of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Like for example, the psukim that we just quoted earlier from Yehoshua, right, where he gives a little bit of a brief history of the Jewish people. So we chose not to take that. We chose to take the psukim with regards to bringing bikurim. So before we get into it, we have to talk about why exactly we're doing this. It's important, even though, like we mentioned in the previous paragraphs, we're kind of focusing on the emunas kabbaleilos, that even in times of darkness, that God is with us. That's the Vihisha Amda message. The other message of the Haggadah, which is one that I think speaks to the opposite side of things, is that all of our success, everything that we have going for us, is a result of Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's all a result of God making us into a chosen nation and giving us certain rewards and certain responsibilities and a certain role to play in the world. If you look at these psukim, what you have is you have Farmer Joe coming to the Beis HaMikdash with his first fruits. Right? So that's really representative of perhaps, I guess, the ideal moment of Jewish history. You have somebody that's living in the land with Jewish sovereignty. He has the Beis HaMikdash. Spiritually, they're on a high level that they're deserving of that. Economically, he's doing well. This is the beginning of the harvest season. He's got his first fruits. He's doing well. And that person comes and he says, God, this is all because of you. And then he reflects on the story of how this all came about, how they came to their mission in the first place. And the reason why we're bringing up these psukim now is not just because we want a brief synopsis of Yetzias Mitzrayim, but because we also want to know what to do with it. What am I supposed to do with this story? And the answer is, and that's really what I guess because we're not going to get anywhere near the end of Magid, we should mention, you're going to start singing Dayenu, you're going to start elaborating on all the miracles that happened in all the different Makkos, how many miracles were within each Makkah, 5, 4, etc. It's because we're trying to develop a theme of Hakaras Hatov. We're trying to develop the idea of how lowly of a state we were in, and how amazing it was the way God took us out, to really develop the idea that we owe all of our success, even at the height of our success, like the farmer here is in, to God, and that with that to accept a certain responsibility to do the mitzvahs that we're supposed to do. So that's why a farmer in this stage at this mitzvah specifically, he starts talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim, and that's why we take this narrative and we bring it into the Haggadah. So let's start actually darshaning. It's important to realize that I remember once telling this to a group of people at a seder that I think I just assumed in previous years with them that this was a given, that what we're doing here is we're taking these psukim from the parsha of Bikurim. You quote a pasuk, and then you elaborate on it. If you have a good Hagada, what it does is it takes every phrase of that pasuk, it puts it in bold, let's say, and then it tells you the elaboration. I always thought it would be a creative way to actually display it, and more people would get what's actually going on if you took like the psukim on top of the page and then made like a line and made like, so to speak, Rashi commentary, which is what we're reading right now. What we're doing is we're taking the Sifrei, the Midrash of Chazal, where they expound on these psukim. But what we're doing is we're taking a pasuk. You're going to see the next phrase. It's a part of that pasuk, and then they explain what does that mean, and you go on and you do that for the next 4 psukim constantly. Somebody that doesn't know that's what's going on, they told me when that was the first time they had heard it. They get to this point where the Seder's been dragged along because of, I don't know, or whatever people have to say on the first parts that aren't as important, and then you get to this part, you want to eat your meal, you have mitzvah, you have morah or matzah to do, that at this point people kind of just fly through it. This is the part that is perhaps most important, that has to be developed the most, that has to be understood the most. If you're going to translate something into English, which I recommend doing for the entire Haggadah, but if you're going to do it for any part in particular, it's this one. You have to really understand what's going on, and if somebody's in the kitchen working on the meal, wait for them, or tell them to come in, because this is crucial. So
sorry, I don't see bikurim in this pasuk. I don't.
Right, so you're not going to see bikurim in this pasuk. Again, you have to look at the Chumash in its greater context.
Where it's taken from, yeah.
Right, the psukim that introduce these concepts are. Farmer's going to come.
Why is this section crucial?
The Mishnah tells us that this is something you have to do in the Haggadah. First of all, it says you're supposed to darshan arami oved avi. You're supposed to expound on these psukim. So the Mishnah says so. Why do they say so? Because I think it's in many ways the other side of what we've been asking up until this point in the Haggadah. Every single paragraph we've come to, we said, this isn't the story about Tzibur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Who cares? And we've talked about why we should care. But now we're actually getting to the story. This is where the story actually lies, and that's why it's really crucial. So, anyways, the way this starts is actually kind of unique. Chazal start this drasha by saying, "Seyu lamad, come out and learn." In a deeper level, we're saying, come out of perhaps certain preconceived notions and learn about the ideas of Tzibur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Mad bikesh Lavan ha'arami la'asos leYaakov Avinu. What was Lavan, the Aramean, trying to do to Yaakov Avinu? It was worse. Shaparo lo gazer ela al hazacharim. Paro only made a gezerah, a decree to destroy the males. But Lavan bikesh la'akor es hakol. But Lavan, nevertheless, he wanted to uproot everything. Shene'emar, and then it starts to quote the pasuk. But first of all, why are we bringing up Lavan? Why is this important?
Yeah, but what do you mean he was trying to uproot everything? You're talking about the Jewish people?
Right, so if we're referring to killing...
There was no concept of Jewish people at that time, of Yaakov. It was like a tribe.
That's what, so to that extent we can answer Yaakov was the father of the Jewish nation. If he had killed Yaakov, there'd be no Jewish people for sure.
We understand, but it was a clan. It's not as if, Lavan had a nevuah, a vision of... From Yaakov was going to be this people that was going to be given the Torah by a Kodesh Baruch Hu, was going to travel through history. It's not as if the guy was acting out of like a malice to the Jewish people. It was like he basically had it out for Yaakov.
I don't know if you have to deny that. It could be, he didn't know the cosmic significance of what he was going to do, but this is what he was trying to do. But I think the bigger question is, was Lavan trying to kill everyone?
I'm sorry?
Was Lavan trying to kill Yaakov and his entire family?
No.
No, that's the bigger question.
Spiritually.
Okay. So first, when talking about physically, physically, maybe Yaakov himself. If you look at the actual psukim, sounds like Lavan was pretty upset at Yaakov, but his grandchildren, his daughters, he certainly didn't want to kill.
It was more an economic grievance.
Right.
Basically.
Between him and Yaakov, but he didn't have that grievance with the children, with the rest of Yaakov's progeny. So it's important to realize, we're going to quote the pasuk. Let's just say it right now. Arami oved avi. An Aramean tried to make my father lost. That's how Chazal are apparently reading these first words in the psukim. Always important to realize that the pshat of this pasuk is really not that. It's more like what Ibn Ezra says. Arami oved avi is probably means something more along the lines of, my father was a wandering Aramean, referring to Yaakov himself. But anyways, the way Chazal learn it, and that's what we see from this first clause that introduces the pasuk, they saw bringing Lavan into this has a deeper meaning. Was significant. We went down to Egypt. We lived there. A small number. We became their nation, big, and big. So we'll have to elaborate on what each of those bigs mean. But So just to point out, so why are we bringing up Lavan? We were talking about spiritual destruction, like you mentioned. The word oved doesn't mean destroy necessarily, even though you'll see it used, I think probably translated in many Haggadas that way. But like we mentioned, that Lavan wasn't trying to kill everyone, right? He maybe Yaakov, but not the rest of the family. So you have to see that Chazal understood this in the sense of, spiritual destruction. And in that sense, I think oved probably means more lost. An object is an aveda, right? It's something that's lost. That's what Lavan was trying to do, make us spiritually lost, and that's the introduction into these psukim that we're going to darshan, perhaps next year, because I'm looking at the clock and it's 8 o'clock. But even though we didn't get to the core parts of the Haggadah, right? And you think a shir that was dedicated to the core parts of the Haggadah, we may have covered it.
The real thing.
I think. Know that when you're reading these psukim and you're going through them, you're supposed to elaborate on the story more to accentuate how the Jewish people were in a very low state in their slavery, and how we came to a much more refined state through the amazing miracles that God did, and that we again had a source of emunah to draw on, and that we have to thank Hashem for it. That's the rest of of Magid. You sing Dayenu. You talk about how amazing the various makos were. You sing Hallel at the end. That the main goal of this is to elaborate on this story in particular. You could look at first of all, the Midrash itself, which the Haggadah is using, is an elaboration of all these psukim. It takes these words and it elaborates on and tells you key parts of the story that you won't see in the shorthand form, but that are alluded to in the words, just like we mentioned, Gadol Atzum Varav. So the nation was big, big, and big. What does that mean? That each and every word has its own connotation that Chazal themselves elaborate on. And then to look further, look at what the Rishonim say about those elaborations. It's a super commentary. If you look at other Midrashim, or like we mentioned last week, this is a fantastic Haggadah, the Gadi Palak Haggadah with the pictures. Besides being very good for developing the imagination of what was happening there, and having a lot of fun, gory pictures. In the back, each and every aspect of the picture is focused on in a little box. They quote you a medrash in English of, we put this part of the picture in because we want to address this medrash, this elaboration of what the Makos had. Going through this with kids at the Seder is phenomenal. It's a very rich experience. You want to do that for these psukim. You want to do that for the rest of the Haggadah. You want to do that after the meal is over. You want to do that after the other mitzvahs are done. You want to do it until the end of the night. And that's what the Seder is all about.